Jason, your camera is like 1990s t-shirts.
High gain.
For whatever reason, Zoom always resets the brightness on my camera. No other app does that. Well, so both Kevin and Dan have indicated that they're not going to be here um, very quickly, but we can still go ahead and give it a couple minutes just in case we have any other visitors.
In those couple of minutes, I would like to ask something that I'm trying to get more analysts to weigh in on, and I'd like everybody to weigh in on are like framing our kind of broader research questions for the next year as a way to kind of from there backtrack to exactly what data we need to to have in hand. Um, this is kind of stemming from the larger goal that was identified in the 2019 and 2020 visioning of wanting to like document and contextualize what's changed, but needing to put boundaries on that for lots of reasons, but mostly capacity. And so kind of going to saying like, okay, in order to figure out what those boundaries are, like let's think about like what are the output we want to have is, and then like walk back from there. So if you guys have any thoughts on like the kinds of questions you think it would be most like interesting to ask and try to answer, um, that would be awesome. I've got a document I linked here, kind of with some example questions, and I'm going to make that the main topic of tonight's analyst meeting too. It's not really worked to get people to like chime in on Slack, so I'm hoping that in-person meeting might be more work more.
I'm looking at the doc. I'm not off in space.
I don't know that I have much to add other than what I've said in the analyst meetings already. But
Mhm.
I am planning on being at tonight's analyst meeting, BTW, so that'll be
Okay,
interesting to hear what people's thoughts are about this.
awesome. I'm thinking like two broad questions, like one, the term analysis, um, that we're like moving forward with, and then also like a link analysis, thinking about like what um, what sites are becoming less accessible through linking, um, that wouldn't have like too much like policy contextualization stuff, and then one or two kind of medium scope based on the important changes we've seen, but also pulling in the kind of like you know political and legal context for um, that subject matter. That's kind of what I'm thinking.
Okay, well we're at time now, and like we have no reason to believe that Rob's going to be here right away, or Kevin. So
I see Rob.
I said Dan. I don't know why I do that sometimes. Dan. Basically, we have who I think we're going to have. So Gretchen, why don't you can just sort of roll into any other things you want to talk about?
Well, that was one of the two things, and the other is just that I'm still working on just thinking about having a kind of threshold for for analysts to say like only worry about changes that are above this certain priority value threshold. Um, and I do want to say, Rob, thank you so much. I was like retraining an analyst over the weekend, and for whatever reason, his domain had 950 something changes. And I was just like, oh, Jesus, but luckily, like 11 of them were above zero point 0.1 and three of them didn't have values assigned. So he's looking at 14 of those instead of 950. So that is like quintessential, like, yes, this is super valuable. So thank you.
Was the sort of algorithm that Rob posted the code to, was that useful? Was that something you could read for how that was determined?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I'm not sure if the logarithm necessarily is meaningful. Since what it generally does is kind of like extend the lower end, like, and kind of like broadens the higher range, or like flattens and broadens the higher range.
Yes.
Um, so I don't know that it might be just an extra level of complication. But anyway, yeah, that's my first thought. Is like not sure if it's necessary. But yeah, I could understand the code, sort of.
I mean, for what it's worth, we talked, was it last week or sometime, about the concern about, like, seems like there's a big gap between like 0.6-ish and 1. And so I I put the logarithm in there because I knew something like that would be happening. And so I think without the logarithm, that gap would be even larger. Like that's what it's there to do. So maybe what that really means is that we need to change the base of the logarithm so that it's a little steeper still. So that would close that gap a little, if it makes sense to close that gap, which is a different question.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
guess really the question there would be is, are you seeing a bunch of things land at a value above 0.1 that are like, if a bunch of things are compressed all into 0.2, for instance, yeah, sort of making that steeper might change that. I think I've got that backwards actually. Yeah, basically, do you want some current value to be spread over a larger space of numbers, basically? Or is it just useful? It may already be useful enough to just know, hey, if it's 0.1, I don't need to look at it.
Yeah. That's
It's
what I'm wanting the analysts to like make note of this week with like even things that aren't substantively important, but like are they like interesting changes? But it seems like, if a few words on a page and a link have been changed, then it falls in like the 0.15 kind of range. So it seems like they're like the things that I've noticed are like, oh, that's definitely important change, have ranged from like 0.2 something to 0.5 something. But then there's like a bunch in this between 0.1 and 0.2 that are could be important. It just kind of depends on the substantive element of it, which wouldn't be unless
yeah,
I'm incorporating the keyword thing eventually.
yeah. I think that is the sort of problem I was hoping to start addressing with things like the keywords, right? Because everything else right now is based on like the size of the change, which is
Mhm.
definitely not what should be most substantive. Um, Plus, I also wanted to say, like, you should also keep in mind that there's going to be interesting jumps and gaps regardless, because the algorithm treats like a textual change different from just a source change, right? A textual change is like minimum 0.1, and then it goes up from there, right? Versus like a source change is like a continuous grade from 0. Um, and a links change is like at least, I think it's 0.2, and then it grades up from there, right? So like they all have a different sort of like, there's a jump based on the character of the types of changes we're seeing too. And so that'll add up differently also.
Gretchen, anything else? Okay. Well, then I'll just chime in very briefly. We're still working on sysadmin hiring. We've gone through and reviewed sort of the first. We've done a couple of passes on applications. There's still a few dripping in, but we're going to get set up for technical interviews, phone screeners here this month. So, yay. Rob, let's do dev updates.
Okay, I'll try and go through this faster than last time. There's a whole bunch of things that are done. A lot of them were like waiting for review, so we've talked about them before last week. Salient things are like now we have this include earliest argument, which has cut our analyst sheet generation time in half and hopefully made it a lot less likely to fail. I mean, we've only had one sheet run since then, so it didn't have any problems. So I guess it's a good sign. The other salient thing is that we added this active flag so that we can start making manual notations about things that are in the database, but we don't care to like really be paying attention to in general. So the sheets aren't using them yet, but next week we'll make sure that they're not things that are not active also like don't appear in the sheets. That'll probably just happen by default anyway, since that active flag also says we stop accepting data into the database for those pages. So if we pull in an inactive page from Versionista, we throw that away. We never actually like save that information. So those are like important salient things that are done. Everything in blocked is really just awaiting review, so that's mostly done. So adding a status field to versions and pages, which is the precursor to being able to talk about whether a page has been removed. So like the first level of that is being able to actually meaningfully track the status codes for every version of a page. The issues with that, like when I was building all the database stuff, I took an intentionally really conservative approach to information. So if there wasn't something that I was totally confident that we could reliably get from all sources, it winds up like shoved into this like source specific metadata section that's just like a giant blob of stuff. And since status codes we didn't used to be able to reliably get from Versionista, status codes wound up in that bucket, and so it's hard to talk like across all the data we have about whether something's gone or removed without understanding its status codes, and it's hard to talk across all that data about status codes if it's stored differently for different sources at different times. So this is promoting that status code idea to a like top level like canonical thing for all versions, at which point then we can do the work to figure out how to calculate based on that whether a page is what its status code is. Because the thing Eric brought up was that it's important to be able to talk about more than whether a page is just removed or not, because there's different characters of removal, right? There's some pages at the EPA that are effectively removed by requiring authorization now to see them, and so they're not public, but in theory, according to the status code the server gives us, they're there. And it would be helpful to understand that there's a difference between that and something that's entirely removed. So what we're really surfacing in terms of the data is a concept of the status code for the page. And so we've worked out what the algorithm is going to be for figuring out what a page's current status code is, because we sort of have to smooth over the fact that occasionally we have version snapshots that are bad, like the server said, stop bugging me, and it returned to like non-okay, which is 200 response, even though it otherwise would have, stuff like that. So we can't just say, what's the status of the latest version? We're gonna look over like a 2-week window and say, we're X percentage of the checks in the successful category of statuses. And so that'll be a tunable number. We're thinking probably something between 50 and 80%. We require for okay statuses in order to say like the page is currently okay. And then if it's not okay, then we take whatever the most common over that time frame error code is and say that that is the current status. But we haven't done that algorithmic part yet. So this is just surfacing the fact that we can have a status code for both pages and for versions, and pulling up all the data that we have and all the different ways we've stored it for versions into this new like standard way of storing it. So that's what that is. And the salient thing is that it's the precursor to actually being able to say whether a page is present or removed. Then Other things are blocked. There's a bug about the API and getting changes. Another thing I discovered while doing all this status work is that Versionista added like super complicated way that we can go find status codes for everything. So we previously had a problem where we could only get status codes from Versionista if the status code was an error status. And we couldn't, there are a variety of like okay statuses, and we couldn't get that information. We also couldn't get information about redirects. But now we have that. It's just really complicated to get. And I don't know when that information showed up on Versionista, because basically there's a little link at the bottom of the page. It's like, download this data as a CSV, except the CSV you get has almost entirely a different set of data from what you get on screen. Like the only things that overlap are the title and the capture time. Like all the other data in there is like a completely disjoint set from what's on screen. So when I first started working on it, they had that feature at the top level of the, like for your whole account, and it would list all the pages, but it didn't have most of the information that's in this page level CSV. And so when I looked at it initially, I said, this barely gives us anything more than we already have, and it doesn't help us do anything more effectively, so I just kind of ignored it. And I'm fairly certain, because I remember looking at that and trying to determine whether we could do something better with it, because it's a nicer structure for the data. I'm fairly certain I looked to see whether there was a similar thing on sites and pages, and there wasn't. But there is now, and I don't know when it got added. I just happened to notice, like, oh, hey, there's a CSV link there. And the one for pages has a different set of information that's a useful set of information. So now we're pulling that. So now the process for scraping a page takes a little bit longer, but we get more information. It's not as rich as like what we get from Internet Archive, but it's much richer than what we used to have, which is a good thing. So like we pull all the versions on a page, and then we grab the CSV for the page, and we pull all the data from that, and we go, oh, which of these match up, and put them together. And that's how we get the version data now. So long story short, we have some additional information, like what the status code was, what the actual content type was. So like whether it was a PDF or a text file or an Excel file or whatever. We had some like really loosey-goosey ways of figuring that out before, but now we can actually just read that information directly, which is like a huge
less explosion on the processing side, hopefully.
Hopefully. And then like added some of the features we had to the DB to the Python client. So those are the things going on there. They're all awaiting review. The CSV thing for Versionista, I put directly into production, because like the longer we don't have it, the more versions we miss that data on. So it's functional. So what it needs as far as review is for somebody to say, this is a reasonable arrangement of the code. Or, if nobody has time, then it's fine, because it's working well. So that's that. In progress is continuing to work on all the things about dead removed status stuff. So adding the calculations for figuring out on the page level. And then continuing to work on wayback imports. So the things that I was able to do this week was expanding that acceptable time window for valid memento playback. We talked about that a little bit last week, so that's done now. It improves things significantly, but there's still a lot of mementos that can't be played back. So we went from like 40% of mementos that can't be played back to like 25 to 30% of mementos that can't be played back. It's just improvement, but there's still a lot that Internet Archive just can't give us the data, even though they have it. And some additional work on like parsing, and all of that stuff seems to somehow have improved the process reliability, so it doesn't get stuck all the time anymore. And it hasn't gotten stuck at all since I made the changes last week. So that's good. It just is odd because it doesn't match up with any of the things that I had expected to be the problem. And so things left to do is a little bit more massaging of how we retry things that failed and coordinate between retrying so that we don't slam Internet Archive too hard when it seems to stop. so hopefully that'll get the error rate down a little bit lower because we still get a lot of errors. And then like general cleanup and fixing signal handling so that when you kill the process, it actually dies properly, which is the thing I thought was the problem with it getting stuck. But I didn't do that work, and it's anyway. So that's what's done and to do still there. Upshot is like it seems more reliable. It seems like it is close to working as well as it's going to work at this point. All my additional concerns about Internet Archive being unreliable but very rich in its data compared with Originista being very stable and just a pain in the butt otherwise though. So there's that. Things are up next, finishing the rest of the work around like flagging pages is removed. Dan and I talked a little bit more about that Save Page Now stuff that I did last week. And I did some work on prototyping, making Save Page Now 2 work well. We're still concerned that it might be kind of flaky in super beta. So what we talked about maybe doing is putting the Save Page Now 2 script in production alongside the like Chrome automation that we're doing. And we'll just sort of like swap off so that we're doing both. And that will start to give us a little bit of a feel for whether Save Page Now 2 is being flaky or whether it actually is kind of reliable and we should just switch to that because then we can do a lot more, a lot faster at lower impact and lower cost. It doesn't require nearly the resources of like running a web browser. And then there's some issues around the diff styling changes that Fotis from Internet Archive, the Google Summer Code student did, which were like good changes, but they broke the contrast adjustments in Safari. Turns out Safari has an oddball bug around the very fancy new CSS feature he used to do it. And some things around how we're handling this like internal different flag on versions that I think caused some extra and spurious stuff to show up in the analyst sheets this week. That's how I noticed this. I mean, it shouldn't be a problem for you. There's just a few lines here and there that you'll see say that there was no change at all, which they shouldn't be in the sheet if there was no change at all. And this is why. So we can do more heavy work in the sheet generation to fix that, or we can change what the different field means. And I think we're going to just change what the different field means. And then the things I have had on my list of up next for like 2 months, authorization system for the DB, cleaning up Pat's all his unfinished work that just got left there, and looking into what we need to do about queuing and rethinking how we manage the running of automated analysis so that it is a little bit reliable. I think there were more rows in the sheets this week than I had expected that didn't seem to have automated analysis information. And one of the things I noticed the other day is that it seemed like stuff got kind of stuck. And there were like 15,000 analyses sitting in the queue. And I restarted all the differs, and that seemed to unstick it. And then it took a day to do all of those, but they all got done and the queues back down at basically 0. So having a better way of queuing and managing that stuff might help, but also like that points to we need some better monitoring. We need the health check stuff working, all of that kind of thing, so that things get automatically restarted when they're stuck. So there's like lots of basic work and infrastructural things around the automated analysis and queuing that we need to do. So that's me.
Well, so yeah, I've realizing that Rob was in a things that I've written need to review hole last week. I picked up my review pace a little bit, and that's really mostly what I did, technical work wise. took a look at our first pass of candidates for the sysadmin position, and then wrote up my monthly update for the grant. I'm doing a all edgy update tomorrow on the status scanner, so I'm currently prepping for that. Not blocked on anything. Up next, yeah, Rob, gonna review some of the work that you have outstanding, and we'll see. I don't know exactly what the timetable is going to end up being, but do the technical phone screeners for sysadmin candidates, and then we'll just see where this falls on the list. But I need to go. Rob gave me a really good, informative review on a PR I put in place. This is not a super high priority thing, so but it's good for me to sort of learn the workings of the platform. So I'm going to circle back around and take another swipe at that after all of those other things. So that may still be on my up next week. We'll see. And that's all I have. Shall we move on to other discussion items? So yeah, Versionista is the kind of the big thing. I believe our end dates are the 20th for one of the accounts and the 23rd for the other. So because the two accounts aren't exactly synchronized. Obviously, we've had some discussion on Slack about maybe we can not have those turn off. So I'd be happy, Kevin, to get with you asynchronously if there's anything. Stephanie mentioned that you were doing a write-up to maybe see if we could extend the funding for that. If there's anything I can provide you with to help, I would be happy to do so.
Yeah, just a quick update, because then I think Rob asked a question, and then it just got me thinking, so, oh, Versionista is going to end soon, so I was like, maybe we should do something about that. And so I was going to bring it up to the group. I've been meeting regularly with the Science to Action people, and actually it's really just Anne right now and Justin. And they mentioned that they wanted to, so they're planning a workshop in March, and they wanted to maybe demo or just think about like the web monitoring work as a use case, because that's like identifying diffs, and like, they wanted to go over our process of like, how do we decide whether something's significant or not? And because they want to do that, like, oh, okay, well then there is a connection between S2A and web monitoring, and those funds have been sitting there, and it's like, well, then we can make a case for like, helping the platform with these funds because they want to look at it at their workshop. So I just wanted to throw it out to us to see what we thought about that. If we needed it, sounds like we might. The questions I would have is, how much is it? I don't know. Maybe we can do this later. So just like how much we should ask for, and how, like, is it 1 month, 2 months of both? And then the other question, I just lost it. But yeah, that was mainly it. Like, I would, try to. Oh, so the other thing I need to tell people was that we haven't actually received any of that funding into like the public lab, so we would have to like do it soon, so that we can like actually draw on those funds. It's still sitting with their fiscal sponsor, so we would have to do it soon. There's a S2A meeting after this in an hour, and so I was going to bring it up there as well once I got input from us here.
I'm DMing you the bill amount for one of those accounts, Kevin.
I think we said we're trying to be generally open about costs, so I'm just going to say it.
Okay.
The Versionista plans are their top level enterprise plan, and they're $12.50 a month each. So we have two accounts because we max them both out. So our monthly spend on that is $2,500.
Okay. And then how many more months do you think we should ask for?
Probably one, I mean, if it's important to have for like whatever kind of stuff they're going to demo for Science to Action, and that is like in March, then maybe we hold on to one account and maybe we downgrade it. I don't know. I think there's some thinking there. I mean, the thing I should say is like, my chief worry is like the fact that the Internet Archive stuff still feels like super unreliable and shaky to me, even though at least it seems process stable now. But the flip side of that is that the reality is like me being the person who like 100% wrote like both of these like ETL tools, and I know all the like weird grody things about all of them. Like I'm never really going to feel confident in it, so I'm always going to be like when we have to like cut off the other one. Like I have two things to hold on to, and if one breaks, it's not the end of the world. Like now back to like one safety line. And so part of this is just me going like, I'm only gonna have the one thing. Nobody else like as familiar with this as me, and what happens if it breaks? Is really like I should be clear that like probably a lot of what's driving my like concern about turning it off is that. And I'm always gonna feel that way, like no matter when we make that decision, probably. So just putting that out there is like temper my statements with knowing that like that is the set of feelings that I'm gonna have around turning it off.
Yeah, I guess that I think that makes sense, and thanks for that. The issue is just that like because we don't have any of the money right now, so I'm like, so I don't know whether to ask for all the money to just come over the 30K, or whether we ask for a portion, because I don't know if there's like fees to like send things back and forth, and if we're not going to use it all, like we shouldn't take it. But I guess we can budget for like 2 months, and if not, then we could go to something else or something. But or it might just be like they send it all of it to us anyways, because that's how it was written in the grant, and then we have to figure out what to do with it, and then return it at the end if we didn't end up using it. So the proposal is really, it's not like a legally binding thing. It's just for us to keep track of like, who's using the money and why. So the proposal is really just for Stephanie, so that she has a good idea of like why we're asking for this money and what it's used for. It doesn't go to Packard. It doesn't go to anybody. It's just like us saying that we want to set aside a certain sum of money. So it's not a legally binding thing either.
Okay. I mean, I don't want to like steal money from Science to Action or archiving.
No. This money is like set aside for Edgy, like, and it's up for us to decide whatever the heck we want to do with it.
Right, but I mean, like, web monitoring is not the only thing in it.
Oh yeah.
I know that interviewing has like applied or asked for some of the funding for transcription and coding of some interviews, and one analyst has a real interest in also seeing what we could do at like state level, we get state level changes, and is going to apply for, or I think has or is going to apply for like $2,000 or something to kind of like review state level web changes as well. I think only using the Internet Archive and not Scanner, because I just don't want to like be a bother or burden. But in any case, yeah. So I know that like some little bits of the funds are being asked for by other places, but if we can like do productive work for that 30K to further the Science to Action like goals, I think we absolutely should use it. And it's also open for like other people, like pay some of Rob's work, like, and that sort of thing I think is totally fair game.
Yeah. I mean, I think, Kelsey, I'm glad you're here, because I know that I was gonna say some of the momentum on the Science Action stuff has been kind of slow, and so maybe you might have some ideas, like maybe you had ideas for some of that 30,000 that like might help push us along. I was gonna ask at the next meeting, but since you're here, it might help inform the conversation.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it, the plan that we have for a March meeting to do research on cross-disciplinary end users of data, that type of stuff. The current way that plan is written is as a 3-day conference, and that is a very expensive thing to do. Other than that, I'm not really sure what S2AC does, which is like on my list to do this week. It's figure that out better, but like, as far as I can tell, it's that and the survey, and the survey is not a thing that necessarily needs funding at all. I think we just use our networks for that.
Just to clarify, so I looked at the grant yesterday. So they already, so you know, the 30K that we have is just a portion. They have a large portion also set aside for their workshop, like to pay for all the travel and all that stuff already. So this
Well then, yeah.
Yeah, this 30K really is, it's just like kind of like for Edgy to help them in any way that we see helps them. It's like a question mark bucket of like whatever we decide to like that would help them. And so
Yeah.
because yeah.
So I guess what I've been thinking of, and this, I don't know if this is necessary S2AC funding or just funding from somewhere, but I think that one of the things that would be extremely useful for probably S2AC, definitely Edgy, is to short-term hire a UX researcher. And like, I've been talking to a friend of mine who does this stuff about like what kind of hourly this type of stuff requires and what manner of work this would be. And I think that ends up being a thing that would further a lot of goals. But it is, I don't know, like I don't feel like I have a lot of expertise in scoping and budgeting contracts. So I get very uncomfortable when I try to think about how to apply a specific chunk of money. S2AC wise, I really don't think, like if there is money already set aside for the conference, and we really don't think there's money that's needed for the survey, what I've seen in terms of our interaction with S2AC is that like there's not the drive or people power there to support doing anything else anyway. So if we can use money well, we totally should.
Yeah. Okay. I was just seeing if you had thoughts for like using most of that already, but so it sounds like we have enough for the things that we want to do, like, and
So-
especially for Virginia funding.
I have a thought about like if we do request to repurpose or to purpose this money for paying Versionista, I mean and I kind of said this on Slack, and Rob's kind of said as much here. You know, we're pretty close to, in a sort of rough grain sort of way, we're getting pretty close to as good as Wayback Import can be. Like some of the things that are making it not great for us are things we can't change. So it feels like if we're gonna extend Versionista, just so we don't have like a regression in our effectiveness, that it should be with the point that we're working on something that's not Wayback Machine imports. Like I feel like we're close to saying, and this is kind of messy, and it is getting us some stuff when it does. And then, you know, of course, there, as new and interesting creative ways of breaking and mitigating pop up, of course, that will be something meriting time to keep things working. But that's just kind of my perspective on that. I don't know. That seems like it kind of dovetails nicely into talking about doing our own crawling.
That's true.
Yeah, I
Okay.
think you're
Okay,
on the right track there.
Yeah. Can I? So I'll just ask for 1 month. Does that sound okay? Extension for Versionista.
I mean, my feeling is that if we're going to extend Versionista, it's not going to be to delay ripping the Band-Aid off for Wayback Machine. It's going to be to give ourselves space to do something different. And I think that would take longer than 1 month.
I see. I see.
Well, also, is there any harm in having two things running at once for a short period of time? Because that would be great and far less pressuring. I did also want to point out, is it specifically the one next month? Because that's not a great 1 month to extend over in hopes of having a new thing by the end of it.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's no problem with having many sources of data coming in at once. Like we've tried to structure the whole system so that it's actually extremely friendly to that happening. I think the better way to think about it is like at this point, to Jason's point, like we're getting close to like importing from way back being as good as importing from way back is ever going to be, which, you know, has its own things. But like maybe the better way to think about it is holding on to Versionista longer is like having some buffer and some safety line if things go wrong somewhere. So like if we have problems with Versionista, cool, like Internet Archive still working. If we have problems with Internet Archive, cool, like it's not a total emergency because we still have Versionista data coming in. And so cutting it off means like we're in a situation where the only working tool we have is the one that is the most complicated one. And I don't feel any confidence that other people are at all familiar with that PR so far and what it's doing and how it works. And so like if things break, it's like a super emergency for me to fix it. And like we already know that there's all kinds of like complicatedness with Internet Archive importing anyway. So like the way to think about it is like a buffer or a safety line maybe. And the question is like, what's that worth versus like other things we could be spending that money on, like web monitoring or other parts of Edge.
Go B5.
Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Yeah. I think it's pretty important we get an answer to the question on when the funding runs out for this. Do we know for sure? Like, when does Versionista get turned off if no money is added? Is that the end of December or the end of January?
20th, December 20th.
December 20th. Okay. So to like dive into this, I didn't realize this was such a time sensitive thing. I thought well, to be honest, I just ignored the problem. Now that I know that this is a problem, this is worth some consideration. Because the other side of this is feature parity, right? If we're going to build something that is in any way a stand-in for what we're getting from Versionista, then being able to compare to what it outputs in a real-time basis is really important. So I would advocate for, like, there's another reason to keep the lights on Versionista, which is just, if we're trying to replace Versionista, having Versionista running while we try to replace it is going to be a valuable thing. And now that I know that that's time sensitive, that's okay. That changes my weekend. My startup is not going to be happy. The other side of this is, I think it's worth pointing to the fact that the thing that the web monitoring project is doing is not something that can be replaced. As those web pages change, they are changed, and that a gap in those records and that tracking is not something that we can pay to replace. And so traditionally, when we think about cost-benefit analysis, the cost of not having the archives that we need to do analysis is much higher than even 5K. The fact that we are an organization with no charitable status and no money is just reality, and unfortunately kind of plays on this. But just in terms of like understanding what we're dealing with here, I think it's really important to acknowledge that getting these archives and having them consistent and having them be a contiguous record is pretty important in my eyes. And so I think it'd be worth sort of like weighing that. For that reason, I think a minimum of 1 month extension is like something that we could work with. 2 would be awesome. But I think that extending this is a priority. I know web monitoring as a project eats a ton of money. I think it's worth it personally. And I don't work on web monitoring correctly. So that's my 2 cents. But we should totally take this up with the committee. But I would add my voice to the ask to appropriate some funds to make sure Versionista stays on, with an acknowledgement that we would then use that money to do more than we normally do, which is to make sure that whatever we're building that kind of replaces it we're now treating that as precious time, which I will now do.
Just to be clear, because I'm not sure if my tone and content match, I'm advocating for us requesting more than 1 month extension. No, I'm not saying that we shouldn't extend. I'm saying if we're going to extend, we should set our sights higher than delaying.
Mhm.
into, yeah, let's build the new thing and try and see how much space we could give ourselves to do something else also.
But we now have a really, and to your point, Jason, I think we have a really clear definition of what success looks like in this context, because the faster we can get off of dependency on Versionista, the less burden we are financially on Edgy as an organization. It's a really valuable thing to chase. And that's a great reason to get off our butts and get this done. We've all wanted to do this, so let's do it. But it's, I think it's a great, it's really easy to know when you're succeeding, because the day you stop asking for money or ask for less money is very good. So I'm into that.
I think there's so this is a good point that you just brought up, which is like getting off of Versionista is removing a financial burden. We do need to take care to keep track, because the theoretical cost of running whatever we might run instead is something we need to measure, and that should factor in. Because right now we've got a lot of free credit from AWS, but that ends in August, and it does not renew again. They've been pretty clear that like it's a year program, and if we like you can probably extend it for a second year, and we're in that second year, and they've been pretty clear that like it does not go beyond that. So like unless we're able to do something really awesome that the GDELT folks like and want to add to like their sort of permanent, very public S3 data for the world, I doubt like that money train is going to continue. So we do have to understand that like whatever we might be replacing Versionista with, we've got a lot of runway to build it for free now, but like it needs to be able to run alongside the rest of the web monitoring infrastructure for less than those costs, which we know what they are.
Kelsey?
Yeah, so I'm unmuted, right? My interface is really weird.
Yeah,
I just wanted to say, I think we should budget 6 months worth of Versionista. I think we should give ourselves that kind of runway, with the expectation that engineering always takes longer than you expect it to, that having compared results across several months would be hugely valuable, and that we have that money, and it's not even all the money. That's what I would propose.
Kevin, and then Gretchen, are you on Stack after?
Kevin, are you in Stack?
No, go ahead.
Okay. This may be a naive question, but what is this other idea if it's not Internet Archive? Like, where are we thinking about pulling the data from? Like, in order, like if it's not going to be Versionista, it's not going to be Internet Archive, like, and we're building a runway, but like, what is the other place that we're building for, or like hypothetically building for? I feel like we've done an excellent job of like ensuring this longevity of Versionista while building for Internet Archive importing, and done an amazing job to be able to pull off of that and to make things more stable. Like I not knowing the technical side, it seems like we're actually in a really great place. So I am just curious what the other idea might be. Is it Walk, where you'd be actually like pulling directly from and is that like in like a 6 month kind of time frame, if we could, budget that kind of money? Is that the idea?
Yeah, I think it's Walk or like something equivalent if we ultimately decide that like Walk is an endeavor that's duplicative of something else or like not editing. But Walk, yeah, is running our own crawling, basically.
Yeah, and to phrase it in a language that I think is important given Edgy values, it's the archiving working group spinning up a support structure for the web monitoring project in the form of Walk.
I really like the idea. Oh, it's somebody else in the Stack. Sorry. I really like the idea of, we we've kind of discussed previously the issues around reliability with Wayback Machine ETL and just the archive.org infrastructure generally, or Internet Archive infrastructure generally. But because we have found that, also Versionista has its own issues, and really just scraping things over it, talking to things over the network that aren't yours can be problematic. I do like this sort of raised bar of making sure that we do have at least 2 legs to stand on, which wasn't really, we really were talking about a 1-to-1 cutover when we were just saying, and then we won't have Versionista, and maybe in some future we can have another thing that's added in too. That feels actually like a really positive way to consider using this other funding. Again, that has a really nice goal, I think, of increasing our effectiveness rather than just trying to keep it the same or maybe a little worse. That's all.
In the interest of time, can we move on to like the cross-team topics? I think the de facto thing, I'm gonna ask for as much money as I can, and we'll see what the SUA people have to say and steering committee and stuff have to say. But that's like the kind of goal. But Brendan, maybe you want to talk about the Walk API PR? Yeah.
Seems appropriate. I think I want to talk more about timelines now. Yeah, and so we'll have both of those discussions at once. Since we last chatted, I sort of mentioned been making some progress archiving works on the EIS search and Walk. Those are 2 sort of big projects at the moment. Kelsey, we got to talk after about the EIS search. But on the Walk side of things, I have spent some time, Rob and Kelsey have been doing some really, really great work on laying out what the API should look like. And it's made my life very easy because it just gives me a series of hoops to jump through. And so I've sort of set up this PR that hopefully gets us to trying to decompose our goal of getting from getting a service that as this like first goal of getting some sort of service that can be consumed by a scanner that sort of serves as a Versionista stand-in. Stepping back 1 step from that, we would need sort of cloud services and ops infrastructure to actually run our own crawling infrastructure, which is sort of in the distant-ish future. And then stepping back from that, we would need some sort of set of APIs. We need tools that actually do the crawling and the running and the walking. And we need to be able to get stuff in and out of them. So the idea here is we're building some sort of service that will be hosted in the cloud and we'll be able to serve up stuff that looks a lot like Versionista, but it's infrastructure that we control. There's running code that we've written. Even better, we didn't write the code. It's just running code that I think is great and does exactly what we want it to. So this PR that I'm working on right now is setting forth the API, effectively implementing the groundwork that Rob and Kelsey have been sort of refining. And so to give a kind of concrete sort of flow to that, the sort of initial set of things initial set of hoops I'm sort of trying to jump through are like really actually quite basic, like just pick 5 URLs, 10 URLs. The number actually doesn't matter. Pick 10,000 URLs, the number is irrelevant, but some number, and then make that into a list and say, hey, Walk, can you go make an archive of all of those? And then store those archives in a folder on my hard drive. And then do that exact same thing again later. So the next day you come back and you just ask for the exact same process, and it goes and creates it in another folder. And so now you have 2 folders, which are both archives of some set of websites that you asked it to archive. Cool, web pages. And then the third thing you would do is you do Walk API, which would be another command, which would then spin up a server and would use those 2 folders to present to you an API that you could then ask, you could query that data for something that looks a lot like the Versionista API. And this is where Rob and Kelsey's work comes in, which specifies kind of how that should look and how that should work. And basically you're querying along 2 dimensions, time and page URL. So like, I want this page URL and I want it inside of this time frame. And that's sort of what we're working on. And ideally you would only ask for things that you had asked it to archive, which would be really nice. But just if we can get that first loop to run on someone's local machine, even in a somewhat buggy fashion, that's a really great starting point for refinement, because now we have all of the tools in place to say, okay, cool, go archive this. We can now, most importantly, we make that something that can run on other people's computers so they can try out and help us understand where some of the issues are. There are specific people that I think it would be really important to get that into the hands of. Jason, Kelsey, Gretchen, Rob, I'm looking at you, Kevin too, although I'm not looking at you because your video's off, it's the only reason I didn't say your name. Basically the people on this call, can we get some like prototype into everybody's hands and say, cool, now that'll make it much easier to measure the distance between a sort of properly functioning, robust service. And so the exciting thing is we're now actually very quickly, once that PR lands, in a place where we can start checking ourselves against the Versionista benchmark. Like, cool, because we have sort of all the basic ingredients that we would need. And while that's happening, I can do some parallel work around setting up the ops infrastructure, which thankfully some of that has happened in a number of places. So that's sort of the thinking, is we would structure this as 2 pull requests. The first one is just to land a pretty buggy prototype. And then the second one would be to refine that prototype into something that is closer to something comparable to Versionista. Just to quickly sort of bookend this with a conversation about timing. Now that the biggest thing that gets in the way of getting this done on time is like, I have a day job. And so that's, but now that I know that like we're in a pretty time crunched capacity, I can take a bunch of time this weekend and I think I can eat a lot of the hours that would need to happen to get this up to par. I've spent a lot of time thinking about the like architecture, and Rob and I have I think a lot of this is working really well because it originated from a pretty solid plan. We've pulled this, Walk is pulled out of Sentry, which was the beginning of some thinking, and then is very much just trying to project all of the thinking Rob's put into what would his ideal crawling service look like. And so we've had a good plan to start with, and I think which means that the dev time is much more linear. We're not really like, how's this gonna work? And how's that gonna get into play? And like a lot of it's like, that thing doesn't work the way, and those kind of conversations are actually much easier, and it makes it a little easier to start plotting the timeline of this thing. But I think with this sort of new emphasis on getting away from Versionista as fast as possible, we should have a conversation about timing and what good, better, best looks like. And should we all be sort of dedicating a little more time and energy to kicking the tires on this thing once this PR lands, or what would it take for us as a team to sort of shave some days off if we all agree in the first place that this is worth chasing?
Thumbs up to that. And I think so the way we've talked about it on this call is like a really different character from how I've been thinking about it. We're now talking about Walk as sort of, it is in the immediate term a very critical thing, because I feel like we're sort of recharacterizing our ideas of like Versionista and Internet Archive as both more substandard for what we want to do than we have been. And like, which is not to say they're bad services, right? Just not like the right match for what we're doing. And so like recasting it as like a lot of the other things, it's important to have like 2 other things running so that we can bleed over onto Walk and like have something that it has to walk against, that then Walk can like surface up underneath, which is a really different way of thinking about it from how I have been. And this is also like, to your questions earlier, Gretchen, I'm sorry this hasn't been super clear, and part of the reason it hasn't always been super clear is because Brendan and I took the very intentional tack originally of trying to keep Walk as like an experiment, and like maybe this will be a thing that works out, maybe not. We'll see where it goes. And it has now transmogrified into like a critical piece of infrastructure we're going to build. So like there's a lot of change in character that I think has happened across all of this in the past month. And so like if that's the case,
try half hour.
Also, yes, it's just, exponential over the course of that month. And so to Brendan's point, like if we're going to look at it that way, then like, yeah, I need to like rearrange the way I'm putting things on my plate to make sure that I have more time to do Walk things and to do the things that I've been supposed to be doing on it for months and not done. So yes.
But Can I jump in really quick, Rob? I think that actually, but our goal sort of shifted a little bit, right? And I think you really hit the nail on the head with like, we think the Versionista and Internet Archive are like not where we want them to be. Versionista far more on the cost dimension and Internet Archive on the dependability dimension. But that means the definition of success in the short term is just get to parity, and like just that we're relying on two things and not one thing. And like that actually is a closer goal than can we be doing like headless Chrome browsing that's identifying resources that need to be. And like I would advocate for pushing that a little farther, and instead for focusing on just like, can we get exact parity with what Versionista does today so that we have something that lets us achieve a cost reduction for the rest of Edgy. To me, that's like a really solid thing, but also gives us like, let's only sprint towards the things we need to sprint to, and then we can develop on like a more rational timeline the stuff that would be really nice to have. Sorry to make the headless Chrome thing a nice to have.
No, but you're not wrong in recasting it that way, because the headless Chrome thing is more about being more equivalent to matching parity to Internet Archive, right? Where like the way I keep splitting this is like Internet Archive gives us way richer data. We just have many more problems pulling it out and making it reliable. Whereas Versionista, like for all the other issues we've had working with them, is reasonably reliable as long as we like treat them super gently. And so, but it has like way less rich data. It doesn't capture sub-resources, all that sort of stuff. So it's like, there's n dimensions on which we're hoping Walk improves things, and fundamentally that like it's good on both of those dimensions, that like each of Versionista and Internet Archive is good on one and bad on the other. About having richer data and having it be more reliable and easier to use and easier to work against. And so if the parity we're looking to match for now is Versionista, then that's good. That's a clarifying thing. Like we're not trying to do all of those dimensions at once. We're just trying to do like, can we grab a straight set of URLs, none of their sub-resources, don't worry about any of that stuff. And can we do that reliably and make it more readily accessible? Which I think is actually a relatively low bar, because it's not so many URLs that like that's a huge lift. It's not like when we were trying to map a website, and it's not grabbing any of the sub-resources, so it's not like it's actually a way bigger thing than what we're asking for. And it's a small enough URLs even that it fits in memory. So we actually don't even have to worry about making this, and well, we probably don't need to worry too much about making this an especially distributed process, if that's what we're trying to match. And then by virtue of like just having the data in flat files on disk is going to be an easier and better format to read from than scraping Versionista's website and like trying to combine. You missed the discussion earlier, Brendan, about I found a way to get more rich data out of Versionista, still not as rich as we'd like, but more. But it involves like scraping part of the page, pulling down a CSV, then like mashing, finding ways to put them together, because one has IDs and the other has times, and so you're gonna like it's great.
Who hurt you?
So like just having simple flat files on disk, not even an API, is an improvement over that situation. So that bar is actually kind of low if we frame it that way, which is great. I hadn't even thought about framing it that way.
So I'm totally on board with this whole feature parity thing for all the obvious reasons that have been stated. My instinct as a PM is to immediately go and write down the things that Versionista has and check boxes on whether we have them. The challenge is I don't feel like I understand what we have. And so I'm not sure, like, first of all, I want to know like if that would be useful for you all to try to attempt a project like that, because maybe you already know or have it written somewhere and I just haven't seen it. No, okay. The other thing is, I don't know, maybe one of you would give me an hour or so of your time to like get up to speed on what it is what the features are. Like maybe I could work with you to outline what we're reaching for, because I don't think I can do that as a solo project, but I do think it's useful to understanding how we're doing.
So I am happy to lend you an hour of my time. I'm happy to lend you more of my time, because what I think about that question is, I'm actually skeptical that you're going to get a lot out of trolling around with Versionista and trying to understand the features it has, because actually we don't want to have all the features of Versionista, which I will come back to in a minute. But all the things that we need and want out of it are clear in my head, and I have probably never written them down straight up for anyone anywhere. So like maybe we just mind meld over a Google Doc and do that. And because as far as Versionista goes, like there's a boatload of stuff Versionista does that we don't need, and that we don't want, and that we don't care about in this context. Sure, like great things that Versionista does, but like Versionista has a whole interface around browsing that we don't need, because we have a whole system around tasking for analysts. Versionista has a whole system around like viewing diffs and caching and all kinds of other stuff that we don't need, because we have our own way of doing diffs that for our use cases are better than Versionista's most of the time. And like where we put all the initial effort on all this stuff before we even realized that that part of our goal was to eventually move away from Versionista was on doing our own diffs, not because we didn't want to use Versionista, but because like Versionista's diffs didn't give us all the information that we wanted, or weren't as clear or didn't display as well as like what we thought we could do. And so we have like a variety of different kind of diffs that like Versionista doesn't offer, and it's not like a one-for-one match, and that's okay. Like we don't care about that part of it. And like there's a litany of these things, right? Like what we're
I think you're right. Like a Google Doc mind meld session would be ideal, and then it's also in a format where we could send it around to this group and like have a final co-writing sign-off kind of thing. That would be really cool. Yeah. I will connect with you later.
And I think that's perfect. As long as I think we should do one round of making sure that we're all on the same page about ratifying this emergency plan and doing it. But this is perfect because what I'm hearing is I'm getting more time to go code. And so I'll go write code. You guys tell me the hoops the code needs to jump through. Jason, if you want to grab that branch as it's happening and be like, cool, this doesn't work. I tried to run this. Where's my instructions on blah? And like starting to proxy information on how to bring others into using the project. I would be delighted if you're interested in having a directly assigned task. Or you can be like, I'm a person with my own agency and I don't want to do any of those things. You can pick your own adventure. But yeah, I think this feels like a plan, and it's the goalpost moved closer and became more concrete, and that is very rare, particularly with this crowd. And so I'm very excited about all of this. Also, Kelsey, I just made you an admin on the walk repo. Gretchen, would you like to be made an admin as well? Do you work with GitHub much? No, okay. GitHub's on there, but yeah, Kelsey, if you want to create the milestones, just knock yourself out. Well, don't knock yourself out. Go and achieve your dreams.
Awesome.
But yeah, I guess to end that, do we all agree? Is this something that we want to chase and do? And like at least just get that PR in and see where we're at. We can reevaluate as we go. Okay, we're all in. All right, dope. So I have to ship some stuff for EIS, and then all weekend is going to trying to get that walk thing to work. Probably see some spurts of activity on Thursday night and then Saturday and Sunday. But we have an archiving working group meeting on Monday of next week. If anybody wants to jump in on that, and just the more we can sort of like speed this along, let's do it. But I think this just jumped up the priority queue for us at archiving. So let's get it done.
Cool. I think we're like well past time, so we should probably, unless any of the other things we had on the list were really important, we should.
I did have a quick question. Is there anybody who feels comfortable with outlining what the financial implications and the timing are for the AWS thing? Because that really should not be forgotten about.
I think that we need to get a Kubernetes instance up and running, because the back half of this is really like, Rob said the word reliable a lot. And so like, let's get something up and we'll very quickly be able to do cost estimates against concrete stuff. I genuinely want to see like how much, because we don't know. I think it's going to be, I genuinely think it'll be like pennies in contrast to what 2,500 a month will be. Like,
we aren't in a position to already know that. Okay.
no, I don't think we can, because we don't know what our API consumers will look like. We don't know what our storage costs will look like, but I don't think that will be high. The question is just, can we resource that properly?
Yeah.
But let's not forget about it. Let's definitely like set some reminder, ideally GitHub issue somewhere to track, and add that as a milestone for launching just post-production. So yeah, cool. Okay, you're all delightful. This is gonna be fun. I gotta go though. All right, see everybody.
See it.